good. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started for tonight. And I'm kind of excited tonight because Henry's going to be giving the talk, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But welcome to the Luminous Mind Sangha monthly Sangha gathering. And we've done this as an experiment for this year, having various members of the group give talks. So to introduce the team, we have Henry Garcia, who will be giving the talk tonight. Jeannie Bard, who is our Zoom host. Thank you so much, Jeannie, for taking care of us technically. So if you have any technical questions, you can always send her a chat. And Marisa Moorer, who's a licensed trauma therapist, and she and I a little bit did the talk a few months ago, and that's on Zoom now as well. What else do I want to say? I think that's about it. So tonight, Henry's going to be talking about the neuroscience of the 4 categories of practice that we teach here at Luminous Mind Sangha, and that are the main ones being researched in neuroscience. I'm really excited for him to be doing this. I got to see the practice version a few weeks back, and it was just excellent. So Henry's enthusiasm for this topic is really contagious. He's a scientist, so he's very good at it. And he's great at making it understandable for the rest of us. And it's practical too, really, sort of seeing how what's being discovered both supports what we've been saying. That was nice to hear. But also there are nuances that can actually help us in our practice. So, tonight we'll be doing, as always, a meditation. We'll have a short break, and then Henry will get into the talk. And then at the end, we'll see if anybody's interested in doing a short inquiry at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Henry.
Great. Thank you so much, Tina, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. So for those of you new to our first Thursday, so as Tina said, we're going to do a meditation here for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a short break, and then we'll do the talk. And today I was thinking I might, and this is going to be lightly guided, so I'll be speaking a little bit at the beginning to get us started, and then I'll stay silent so you guys can settle into the practice. But I want to just spend a little minute into talking about something around this practice that I'll be talking more about in my talk. But so we're going to do a focused attention, or the samatha practice, specifically on the breath. And one of the things that is really great about this practice is that you're bringing your awareness to a very small point. And another way to think about it is the majority of the part of your brain that normally takes in emotion and sound and all sorts of things, you're not giving any attention to that. You're really just focusing on this small point. And what I'll talk about a little bit later is by sort of turning off all of those parts of your brain, you're actually chemically getting it ready to learn and to find new pathways and to be open to ideas and all sorts of things. And so as preparation to get ready for a Dharma talk, it's kind of like there's the Buddha's wisdom right there. Like, let's sit for a little bit, and then I'm going to talk to you about this, because you're actually more able to not only understand, but really kind of let it land. And samatha and the focused attention being so just on a very small point really is, of the 4 categories, I think the most inclined to get your brain ready to kind of listen and learn and think about something maybe a little differently than maybe you thought. So I thought for today, since we're talking about all 4 practices, I thought choosing focused attention for this one would be a really great bomb for the talk as I start getting into a little bit more. So with that, go ahead and get into your posture. So perfectly fine to sit in a chair or a couch, whatever is comfortable for you, on the floor. Just really briefly posture, so you want to be erect and alert if possible, not tense sort of military style, but alert, kind of like if there was just a very gentle string on the top of your head, just lightly kind of pulling you up. So it's like a relaxed alertness. So go ahead and settle in. It's been a long day. Here we are at the end. So go ahead and just land in your seat. Feel your body, feel the cushion supporting you. Maybe take a deep breath if that feels right for you. So for this practice, we're going to be doing mindfulness of breathing, and specifically what we call the Anapanasati or region, which is the region just outside of the nostrils on the upper lip, right around this area. And so with your eyes closed, go ahead and see if you can bring your awareness to the breath at the upper lip. When you first start, you might notice the temperature. You might notice the in and the out. Inevitably, our minds wander. That's what we do. And when it does, no judgment, just gently bring your awareness back to the breath. And in this practice, you don't have to necessarily analyze the breath. We don't want to necessarily get that conceptual with this practice. So it's really just becoming aware of the breath. With those simple but not easy instructions, I'm gonna go quiet. I'll chime back in about halfway through and just bring you back in case you've wandered off. And if you do wander off, no judgment, just gently bring your awareness back to the breath. All right, welcome back, everybody. So I'm gonna start by introducing myself. This is my first time giving a talk here at Luminous Mind Sangha, and although it's really wonderful to see several, if not many, familiar faces, either from retreats or normal attendees of our LMS gatherings. Many of you might not know me, so I'll just give you a little bit of background on me. Um, so my name's Henry Garcia. Pronouns are he, him. I grew up in California, just outside of Sacramento. Um, I actually got introduced into meditation in high school, actually, very mildly. I started getting involved in energy work. My mom was a big proponent of that, and I drifted away pretty quickly. I got involved actually in physics. I started college and went down the science path, and um, did a whole bunch of different things in physics. Part of the reason I went there was because I just have so many questions around how the universe works and where did I come from and all sorts of things. And I just loved physics in the way that it um, gives me a little bit of view into the reality of nature a little bit. But as we see in meditation, it certainly has its limitations. Um, but yeah, I did all sorts of things in physics. I worked for NASA for a while, putting lasers up into space, increasing laser technology. I did some particle accelerator physics at Fermilab outside of Chicago, banging things together at near the speed of light to figure out what the fundamental building blocks are. But I settled down actually at UC Berkeley, where I was working on my PhD for about 3 years or so. I was working on there doing nanotechnology, nano devices. I was very fortunate to be a part of a group that created the world's smallest radio on the nanoscale, a nanotube radio that was, you could fit literally thousands of them inside of the human cell. Pretty fantastic. And um, but lo and behold, fate had its way, and just about 2 miles down the road is a place you might recognize called Pixar Animation Studios, and they came by recruiting, and I have been a big lover of Disney all my life, and I jumped ship before getting my PhD and ran off to go make animated films. And for the past 16 years now, I've been making animated films at Pixar. Specifically, I do clothing and hair. I use physics to kind of make things move along with a host of other things. I also blow stuff up and things like that. Very, very fun. Um, But it was actually at Pixar in the middle of my career there where we started doing lunchtime meditation talks. The president of the company at the time, Ed Catmull, is a big meditator. And that's when my formal meditation practice really started. And somehow I managed to stumble across Tina Rasmussen right out of the gate. My very first weekend workshop was with Tina doing the practice we had just completed in our just this past 30 minutes, the Samatha practice. And there were many seeds planted in that 2 days. Thank you very much, Tina, for all the seeds that have blossomed since then. But after that weekend, I knew that there was so much more to me and the world and all of it, and I needed to go figure it out. And started gobbling up retreats, started really starting to hone in on the what I would call the spiritual path, as opposed to just a lot of things we might talk about today about less stress, less anxiety, higher functioning, and all of these sorts of things. And one of the things about me is I'm very much a home, a householder. I have a partner, 3 kids, 2 dogs, 2 cats, a busy career, all the things. But I'm also very much take my practice, very seriously, and I have a very deep practice. And um, so yeah, I think there's like an interesting, not quite the normal as like, both a scientist and a householder, but also having a deep practice and very creative with filmmaking. So yeah, that's a little bit about who I am. And I want to first, as I'm jumping into the talk here, want to first of all thank you, Tina, for the opportunity to talk today. But with Tina being here, and this especially being my first talk, I wanted to invite and welcome Tina to chime in if I ever speak out of if I mess anything up. I very much want the correction, so I invite Tina to speak up. But we'll have time at the end for questions as well. So yeah, so as Tina mentioned, we're going to be talking about the science behind the 4 categories. And I'm going to be trying to hone in on the neuroscience, where there's a lot of social science and all sorts of sciences inside of here. And you'll notice that at no part in my bio did I mention that I am a neuroscientist. So I want to just first acknowledge that out of the gate, that this is something that's become very much a hobby of mine. I absolutely love science. It's the way my mind works. I very much kind of view the Buddha as one of the original scientists. And it's one of the things that draws me to this practice. And so I have, stacks of papers that I've read and gone through to try to figure out, sort of map my experiences onto what's happening inside the brain. And I'm going to be sharing a whole bunch of that with you today. So as a sort of a brief introduction, you've heard Tina and many others here at LMS talk about the 4 categories of practice. So these are categories that are found in Buddhism, but are also correlated inside of this in neuroscience. So the same categories that they found there. So the 4 are focused attention. This is what we did in the guided meditation. Where we're bringing our attention back to a single object to the exclusion of all else. Next up is open monitoring. So Vipassana fits into this category. This is where we're observing the rising and passing away, and we're opening up our awareness to whatever is coming into your experience. And then we have the heart practices, one of my very much close to my heart, if you will. I absolutely love the heart practices. So the Brahma Viharas are inside of there. So metta, compassion, um, and so on. And then we have the self-transcending category. So non-duality fits inside of here. So this is the things that sort of transcend beyond what we sort of take to what we are, what we perceive ourselves to be. And all the other 3 categories all have transcendent qualities to them. So the 4th category is almost kind of an umbrella category, but here at LMS, we focus on Dzogchen, which is one of the pinnacle practices in the Tibetan lineage for the self-transcending. Yeah, so I'm going to kind of go through the 4 of these and talk about sort of at a high level, because I mean, honestly, the way I see it is I could easily talk for an hour on each one of these categories. And, we might end up having follow-up series where I do spend an hour on each one, because there's so much cool science inside each of one of them. But I'm going to kind of try to give you a flavor of all of them. But starting with an overview, one of the things that Tina often talks about is these 4 categories are almost like different sort of routines at the gym. You might might have your cardio and your weight training and your Pilates, and they're all doing something a little bit different, but there's underlying similarities between all of them. Like even if you're weightlifting, you're still getting cardio, this kind of stuff. And so there are some general things we can talk about that all four categories have. And I'm going to start there. Um, so just to say, like, over the past, 3 decades, the NIH alone has funded over 1,700 studies in meditation. So there is a tremendous amount of research that is being done out there right now. And the curve looks like this. It just keeps going up and up. So it's a really exciting time, where we're being able to sort of get some answers to some of these very ancient, 2,500, 5,000-year-old practices. And it's really exciting. And so as an example, like back in 2017, Time Magazine, put out, an article that said mindfulness meditation helps you handle stress better, and this is how I came to meditation. It was like, I would love to have less stress. I would love to have, less anxiety. And this is some of the first things that we see inside of the headlines. I went onto the Mayo Clinic's website and they give this list of benefits for meditation. And this isn't any specific category of practice, but this is what they said on their website. The emotional and physical benefits of meditation can include giving you a new way to look at things that cause stress, building skills to manage your stress, making you more self-aware, focusing on the present, reducing negative feelings, helping you be more creative, helping you be more patient, lowering resting heart rate, lowering your resting blood pressure, helping you sleep better. Not a bad list. They go on to say that meditation may help people manage symptoms and conditions such as anxiety, asthma, cancer, chronic pain, depression, heart disease, high blood pressure, irritable bowel syndrome, sleep problems, tension headaches. Like that is a laundry list of benefits of meditation. And the truth is, like in all of these categories, you're going to see some of these benefits. And I'll get into sort of why that is the case. But this is, we all come to this practice for various different reasons, but there are a lot of people who come at it for these reasons. Oh, I'm having this pain, I'm having all of this, these different symptoms. And doctors inside hospital settings are now prescribing meditation for people. And it's because it has so many of these benefits. So first of all, one of the most sort of fundamental things that you'll find across all four of these categories is the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. So you've heard about the fight or flight response, that's the sympathetic nervous system. And then there's the parasympathetic, which is the rest and relax and digest, part of our nervous system. And these things are like a teeter-totter. You can't have them both up at the same time. Like if you're in fight or flight, you're not resting, you're not digesting, you're not doing any of that. And then as you're activating the parasympathetic, your stress is going down and your anxiety is going down. So as we sat for that 30 minutes in the beginning and you felt your breath going in and out, like feeling the breath and being aware of your breath is triggering your mind that you're safe, you're okay. You wouldn't be focusing on your breath if there was a bear right there. So there's a way that just becoming aware and present that you're activating this parasympathetic nervous system, which is putting your body into a place of relaxation where tension and stress lowers, blood pressure lowers. So a lot of these underlying benefits just come from getting out of the stress, getting out of the anxiety, and getting into that rest and relaxation. One of the other big things that is happening is when you are meditating, it is actually affecting the structure of your brain. One of the things that Tina often mentions is that meditation is like a software upgrade for your brain, and it's 100% true. They've done studies that show that not only the gray matter in your brain, but the white matter as well actually increases in size with as little as 6 weeks of meditation practice. They can measure structural differences inside the brain. So the gray matter of the brain is, you can think of it as kind of the knowledge. It's the storage of information that tends to be more around the surface and the outside of your brain. And then the white matter is more in between, that's connecting all of the bits together. I like kind of think of it as like the white matter is kind of the telephone operator that's connecting this to that. You know, I see pizza, I have desire. You know, there's like this connection between pizza and desire for me. And I've also heard it said that gray matter is like knowledge and white matter is like wisdom. And I think that's not a bad analogy for it either. And one of the amazing things is not only is it a software upgrade, as in that telephone operator controlling where things are being connected, but really it's also a hardware upgrade because you're actually changing the structure of your brain and increasing the regions that have more emotional regulation, that have more joy or love, depending on what it is that you're practicing. So it really is a software and a hardware upgrade. Um, the Buddha said that whatever a monk keeps pursuing with his thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of his awareness. And in neuroscience, they say what wires together fires together. And the truth is, these are saying almost the exact same thing, you know, and it's pretty remarkable that 2,500 years ago, the Buddha was saying something that the neuroscientists just now are coming around to sort of realize that you can actually train your mind. Like the Buddha was describing neuroplasticity right there. And now we've seen how that correlates inside of the brain, which is a pretty remarkable connection. So jumping into the focused attention practice. So this is the practice we did at the beginning, where we focus on the breath. And just to explain a little bit about how focus attention works. So there's something called the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex, and this is the sort of attention center of the brain. It has many different functions to it, but it is the thing that is controlling. In part of its function is that it's controlling like what you have your attention on. So when I say, like, if you're really, like, say there's a snowstorm and you're driving and you're really focusing on your driving, you're tuning out everything else. It's this part of the brain that is kind of shutting that thing off, shutting the rest of it off so that you can focus on the task at hand. It also has several other functions, which I'll get into a little bit later around emotional regulation and a list of other things. But so as you are bringing your awareness onto a single object, which is what we're doing in focus attention, that ACC is turning on and is bringing your awareness onto the breath and closing off everything else. And when it does that, the way that the brain does that is it sends these signals through the brain that says, like, don't give me any of the information that's happening there. And when the brain does that, the brain likes to be useful and it tries to make itself as useful as possible. So if you kind of shut it down, it's basically going to say, hey, this part of my brain isn't as useful anymore. Is there a way that I can rewire it to make it more useful? And so when I was saying earlier about how the focused attention practice specifically is getting your brain ready to learn, the focused attention is using, so you're so focused on a small thing that a large amount of your brain is basically bathing in that neuroplasticity. Um, and you feel that, those of you who have been on retreat and have done the samatha practice, you might notice you do a long sit in the hall and then you walk outside and you look around and everything just feels fresh and new and alive. And it's because you've been bathing in this, where it's like you're seeing a tree for the first time, you know, because that conceptualization has been turned off and you're now seeing things clean and bright. And, you know, this is the neural like correlate to that experience that is can be very profound. So pain, focused attention is the primary practice that is given when we're dealing with pain, although open monitoring as well. But pain specifically, I found this study is so remarkable. So what they did is they basically put a hot plate on them and they make it really, really hot, not so hot that it's going to burn you, but hot enough it's going to really hurt, right? And then they measure the brain and they figure out how strong that pain is, and then they ask you, how bad is that pain? So there's the way the brain, how much pain is being registered by the brain, and then there's how much are you suffering from the pain, are kind of the two things that they're looking at. And what they found is after 4 days of practice, just 20 minutes a day, so this is a very small amount of practice, just to say, they found a 40% decrease in pain intensity as measured in the brain, and a 57% reduction in the felt sense of the pain. And this was by basically they turned the heater on, got it really, really hot. I believe it was on their forearm. And they said, how much does it hurt? And like I said, almost a 60% reduction in pain from bringing your awareness onto that breath, that exact same practice that we did. So that's a pretty remarkable given such a short amount of time. Um, Willoughby Britton out of Brown University did a paper that I found really kind of interesting. She was talking about visual phenomena. So those of you who've been on retreat with Tina on a samatha a talk or have read about the jhana practice, you might heard about the nimitta. It's like a visual light, almost elements that you don't see with your eyes, you see with your mind's eye. But this is very common across many traditions. You might start seeing visual phenomena as you're maybe praying or whatever the tradition might be. And so she was looking at these visual phenomena, and when she looked inside of the brain, what she found was that that visual phenomena correlated with that same neuroplasticity that I was mentioning earlier. And so one of the remarkable things about this practice is that we have these sort of mystical experiences that are very much correlating with the ability to change and shape and train the brain. So let me give you a quote from this paper that I thought was pretty remarkable. She said, visual hallucinations, i.e., the nimitta, arising in the context of meditation practice may serve as indicators that homeostatic plasticity has been activated and that the brain may be more malleable to learning and change. And so she went on to say that basically, like, can we use this practice in order to help people in therapy? So if you want to change the way your mind is working, let's meditate. And when those visual phenomena start to arise, we know you're ready to start challenging those patterns. And then one other thing I want to say, so I just got off of a 25-day retreat where I was doing this exact practice, and I actually have a little EEG machine that I wear. So the EEG machine is sorry, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it, but it's basically measuring the voltage across the surface of the brain, as opposed to an fMRI machine, which is way fancier, but you actually get real-time 3D data of your brain. I don't have anything that fancy; it would probably be the size of my entire bedroom here. But I do have this cool EEG machine that I like to wear to just sort of see what's going on in my mind. And Jeannie, if you could give me access to share here. So one of the things that can happen in the concentration practice is as your concentration is getting stronger and stronger, the hope is, and you train to get your energy to match it. Sometimes as your energy starts to sink, you can get what's called sinking mind, where your concentration is really strong, but your energy is kind of dropped. And it's something that Tina talks a lot about on the retreats. I hadn't had a lot of experience with sinking mind, although I knew enough to recognize it. But after I had been on retreat for quite a while and I had quite a bit of concentration, I got into about 30 minutes of deep sinking mind. And rather than trying to get out of it, which is what I normally would do to increase my energy by moving or something like this, I decided to just sit with it and try to investigate it a little bit more. And lo and behold, when I finished with my sitting, I went and looked at the EEG data, and I was totally floored by what I saw. So I'm going to share that with you actually right now. Um, so here's some real neuroscience. So what you're looking at here, there's these different bands right there that are the alpha, the theta, the gamma, the delta, which I won't go into what those are. But what you'll see is right before about 5:30 on the left, where those peak, that's kind of high access concentration for those that are familiar with the samatha practice. And then you notice where it kind of just dips down, where it just went really low and everything dropped by almost 50%. Everything just got really weak, but it wasn't messy. The bands were still really clear. I was still very concentrated, but it was just very kind of dreamy. And it wasn't unpleasant in any way, but it was just kind of dreamy. And then I heard something outside. There was something scratching I thought it was an animal or something. And so I got up and walked to go see what it was. That's where it jumps back up. It's because I got up and walked away. And then I sat back down and then got back into access concentration. But when I took this off, I immediately texted Tina. I was like, Tina, check this out, sinking mind. I caught it on the EEG. It was pretty remarkable that all of the bands dropped in this way. So kind of fun neuroscience right there for you. Thank you, Jeannie, for that. Yeah, so that's focused attention. I'm going to jump into open monitoring. So this is where Vipassana comes into play. And so one of the things that I found more recently, and I thought it was actually turned out to be one of the more profound studies that I saw was around depression. So depression affects about 8% of us every year, and about 20% of us over our lifetime. And if you've had depression once, you have a 50% chance of having it again. If you've had it twice, you have an 89% chance of having it again. So this is can be a very chronic phenomena. And many of you maybe have heard of MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. And there's a different sort of branch of that called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And this is a program that was specifically designed to circumvent remission inside for depression to arise again. And so what they do is after you've treated depression, you're out of it, they then offer this program to um, help keep depression from coming back. And so what is this doing? So what it's doing is it's teaching to disengage from ruminative thoughts and promote detachment from depression related thoughts and feelings. So this is basically watching the arising and passing away rather than if a depressive thought comes up, rather than attaching to it and taking it as me, there's that gap, as we often say in meditation circles, where there's that space where you get to sort of watch it as opposed to being swept away by it. And they coach through this and they practice this, and they found that it had tremendous benefits. So just to say, uh, they found with normal treatments. So this is exposure therapy, as well as cognitive based therapy. They found that there is a roughly a 66% uh, going back into depression. And with MBCT, they found that there was a 40% less. So there's a 25% difference between sort of the traditional approach to treating depression compared with mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So is it curing everything? Absolutely not, but a 25% reduction is fantastic. Like, what if you paired this with some of those other treatments? And one of the big things about it is that like exposure therapy as an example, in the case of like PTSD, is that like it can be really hard to be with traumatic experiences, but with these kind of therapies, they found that the dropout rate is really small. You're not like as opposed to like exposure therapy, where it can be really hard to do with that and people don't necessarily want to complete it, but meditation is lovely. It actually feels really nice, so they find that people actually stick with the programs even once they're outside of it. They found lasting benefits across several years. Anxiety is another big one. It's one of the first ones that they started looking at, in addition to stress. So one of my favorite papers that I saw, this is actually in the last, I think it was about 6 months ago, or maybe a little bit longer than that, where they found that MBSR, so mindfulness-based stress reduction, was found to be equivalent to Lexapro, one of the most common anxiety medications. And this is with just an 8-week course. And they found that, so just to be clear, right, like an 8-week course with this meditation practice was equivalent to the current anxiety medication that they're offering. And so, again, it's not that it's a cure all, but like maybe you combine the two. It's a pretty remarkable that it was just as good as the Lexapro. And that's just looking at anxiety. I'm sure those patients that were doing that had, of course, all of these other benefits that we've been talking about as well. So pretty profound. Chronic pain is another one. So I talked about pain and the focus attention, but chronic pain is another one that has been studied pretty extensively in this category. And it's pretty similar, where I was talking about the parasympathetic nervous system. As you get into that rest and digest, your blood pressure is lowering and it's allowing your body to heal. And you can sort of disconnect from that pain and promote healing, which is a really fantastic benefit. I talked a little bit about PTSD, but that's another one that is very dear to my heart with many of my family in the military and for our veterans. But fMRI studies have shown that mindfulness-based open monitoring studies practices, sorry, are strengthening the connection between the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that is sort of rationalizing things, and the emotional center of your brain, the part that would sort of get triggered by a traumatic experience. And so fMRI studies are showing that that connection gets stronger so that you can look at the emotional experience that is happening and you can actually bring your rational brain to it. Like, as an example, if you were in a war zone and you came back with a traumatic experience of explosions, and you go to the 4th of July and there are fireworks going off, of course that would be triggering and that could be really hard. But by getting your prefrontal cortex, that logical brain, you can pretty easily see that you're safe. You know that you're safe. You're here in a safe space. Nothing's going to happen. And you can start to disconnect and tease apart those pathways that are connecting loud explosions with danger. This is that white matter that I was talking about at the beginning, where that phone operator is connecting, explosion to danger. You can start to rewire that and reprogram your brain so that you don't have that anymore, and instead connect it with joy. You're celebrating a 4th of July with your family. One of the fun ones I always like to say when I'm talking about meditation with, at colleges or something like this is, this is one of the early studies. This study is probably like 15, 20 years old, but they did a 2-week open monitoring Vipassana course for students who are about to take the GRE exam. So this is the graduate records exam. This is the exam that you take to get into graduate school. And what they found was, after 2 weeks, they found a 15% increase in GRE scores for students. Just by doing that meditation, they were able to boost their scores by 15%. And that is pretty remarkable. And students love it. One last study in the open monitoring, just to say, this is the category that has the most research. It was kind of the first one that was brought over and practiced extensively in the States. But this is a really fantastic study. There was a person at our retreats earlier this year at a Brahma Viharas retreat that was actually expecting. And I didn't know this at the time. I wish I would have, but I found this study actually from the UK where they had 1,500 participants. It was a really large study. It's really fantastic. And they put them into 3 different categories. One of them got normal prenatal care. One of them got MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. And the other one's got a specific diet, a Mediterranean diet, and they got walnuts and olive oil and all of these sorts of things. And then they looked at, the original study was looking at whether or not the babies that were born were less likely to have to be premature or to be small size or any of these things. But the follow-up study, they actually brought the babies in at 6 months, and then they did MRI scans on their brain. And what they found was that, let me make sure I get my statistics right. Yeah, what they found was the ACC, so that part of your brain that regulates attention, that regulates emotion and all of this, was 10% larger in the babies whose mothers were meditating. And even further than that, they did a follow-up study 2 years later. So these are 2-year-old toddlers running around, and they found that larger emotional regulation in the brain correlated with the behavior that you would expect of being able to self-soothe, not getting overly worked up, and this was just from their mothers meditating while they were in utero. I think that's pretty phenomenal. I got pretty excited when I found that study. I thought that was pretty cool. So heart practices. So one of the things are coming recently. So I mentioned MBSR, and MBSR, mindfulness often is equated to Vipassana, and that's not quite an accurate statement. And the truth is that MBSR has focused attention, has open monitoring, and even has the heart practices in there. So when I say MBSR, it's a little bit wishy-washy which category it falls in, but often with MBSR, it tends to be open monitoring. But so I found this study that compared the open monitoring practice in MBSR specifically to something called CCT, compassion cultivation training. So, and what they found was that Both of them had very similar outcomes as far as they were able to reduce psychological distress and improve well-being, but they did it through different mechanisms. So MBSR relies on changes in present moment awareness. So you're decentralizing yourself from the experience so that you can observe it. And the compassion is bringing in common humanity and empathy, where you're feeling that there's a common humanity amongst us all, and you're feeling connected with everyone. There's a place of security that comes through that. And so this is kind of like where research is going now, where you're getting into this, it's not only what is this practice, like what is the outcome of the practice, but how is it getting us there? Like what is actually happening under the hood that's giving us these benefits? Um, there's a fantastic study I found that talks about what's called the broaden and build theory. So basically, what this is this is looking at they specifically meta. So this is the loving kindness practice. And it's a 9-week study where for 7 weeks, they went through training where there was basically an hour of a group meetup. And then you were expected to do 15 to 20 minutes of a guided practice every week for about 5 days, or every day, but at least 5 days a week is what they were kind of hoping for. And so the broaden and build theory is basically that as you get in touch with positive emotions, you broaden your view. So when you are stressed, you tend to be honed in, looking at things that are right in front of you. But when you're safe and open and in touch with love and kindness, there's an openness to it. And you feel this when you're doing the practice. And that broadening allows you to see pathways or different ideas or different ways of interpreting a situation that wouldn't be available otherwise. So that's the broaden aspect. And then the build theory is about building resources. So if you see multiple ways of doing things and you open up, can you actually have resources? In other words, tools that you can pull on in order to improve your life and increase well-being. And so this study was looking at the positive emotions they were looking at so I'll just list them off. So there's amusement, awe, contentment, joy, gratitude, hope, interest, love, and positive self-esteem. And they didn't find that one of them in particular was better than the other. They just found that if these things are arising, you're going to build these resources. And so what are these resources that they're talking about? Like, what are the tools that you would get from a metta practice if you did this? So mindfulness, so being able to be present with what is arising in a neutral way. Pathways thinking, so this is what I was talking about, where there might be multiple options and being able to choose the right path. Savoring the future, environmental mastery, sort of like being able to look at what's happening around you and know what's going on as opposed to maybe being a little bit more confused. Self-acceptance, purpose in life, social support received, positive relations with others, and illness symptoms were reduced as well with this. And so what they did is they basically found that by doing metta, very specifically, they were able to get that cultivates positive emotions. And then positive emotions in turn create these resources. And these resources in turn give you these tools to have well-being and improved life. So to give a quote from the paper, so when people initiated a practice of loving kindness meditation, they enjoyed payoffs both immediately in terms of self-generated positive emotions and over time in terms of increased resources and overall well-being. Meditators even experienced enhanced positive emotions in ordinary life situations, especially those involving other people. This substantiates the claim that this type of meditation changes the way people approach lives. And it's a pretty bold statement for scientists to be making around this, but it really does. In my experience with the heart practices, like I really do feel like these are going to be a really important practice for all of us in the society right now with everything that's going on. But one other thing I wanted to say about this paper is the first noble truth was hiding in there a little bit because they also looked at negative emotions. They wanted to know if by practicing metta, would you have less negative things going on? And they found, nope. Negative things are still going to happen. You're still going to have sadness. You're still going to have pain. You're still going to have heartache. Those things are still going to arise. They may not last as long, but they're still going to arise. So the first noble truth of Buddhism and the truth of suffering is like, we're going to practice and we're going to do all these things, but we're still going to age. We're still going to get old. We're not going to be able to control our environments. And so it was kind of interesting that within this paper, you could kind of see how despite all of our best efforts, the world will still go on, and things are still going to happen. Finally, just real briefly to conclude the heart practices, you can't talk about the heart practices without talking about Kristen Neff and self-compassion. So those of you who haven't heard of Kristen Neff, she's a researcher. Oh gosh, what university? Somewhere in the South, I thought, or maybe it's Arizona. But she does a bunch of self-compassion research and has written books and does retreats. And uh, she basically found that self-compassion, there is a medium to large inverse correlation. So I'll explain that is between self-compassion and negative mental states such as depression, anxiety, stress, and suicidal ideation. So basically, as you practice self-compassion, you're going to lower the risk of all of those things. And she has a bunch of research around this. So I'm not going to go into detail because she's really easy to find, but wonderful research that Kristen puts forward. So lastly, the self-transcending category. So admittedly, this is the category that I've probably done the least amount of personal research in, but is also kind of the most exciting. Actually, just a couple hours before this talk, I found a paper that basically broke down meditation research into three kind of buckets. And one of them was like at the first 15 years, where they were basically a lot of the research that I've been sharing with you around like, oh, what does meditation do for stress and anxiety and depression and all of these things? And then the second, 10 to 15 years was, but how does it work? How does it do that? Those are the resources that I was just talking about in that heart practices study. Like what is happening inside the brain to actually cause these benefits? And what they're proposing now is like in the third step, we're right at the beginning of it, is where we're getting into the non-duality and the transcendent side, where we've heard these words in meditation circles, but it hasn't quite penetrated inside of research yet. So as I started going through studies, it was really hard to find sort of robust studies around this. But just to say, this paper that I read, let me give you a little quote from this. So, self-transcendent experiences may prove to be a means of restructuring the neural system dysfunction that underlies the development and maintenance of a range of maladaptive behaviors and mental states. By pursuing this scientific frontier to deeply understand advanced meditation, including meditative development and endpoints in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, we may access a great and untapped potential to alleviate suffering and advance human flourishing. And this paper is from 2 months ago. So like I said, this is kind of the very beginning, but they're sort of planting the seed of like, the next big frontier about the jhanas and non-duality and what it is doing inside of our brain. And so I'm really excited to see where the research goes from there. Um, and I'm almost done. I'm going a little long. Sorry, everybody. But last but not least, Jeannie, if I could have the share back if you're still there. I wanted to take a moment just to talk about the study that Tina was in. So Tina was invited several years back now to Yale University to be a part of a study there. Um, and Tina put me in charge, so I get to embarrass her a little bit. So there's Tina right there with strapped up to the EEG machine with all the wires and all the things hanging off of her, which I imagine was quite a journey for you, Tina. But I went through that paper and was reading through it, and basically what they were concluding was that through the practice, through the focused attention practice that Tina was doing, she was basically deactivating the thing inside of the brain that is creating the sense of self. And Tina and I were talking right before this talk about like, where do you put self-transcendent in? Like, where does sanding down the sense of self and softening the body boundaries, and where does that sort of then start to get into the transcendent side, and trying to be really specific about that. And even as we were talking, it was hard for us to nail down exactly where we would call it a self-transcending experience versus like a disconnection from the self. But this is that new frontier in the self-transcending category that I was mentioning, that I thought would be that I'm really looking forward to moving forward. Yes, so with that, those are the four categories. Thank you so much for your attention and for listening. And I think we got about 10 minutes for questions if there are any questions out there.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah,
John, nice to see you.
hi. Yeah, Henry, I'm glad you sent me a note today because I'm glad to be here. Nice
Yeah,
job.
lovely.
Really,
Oh,
really
thank you,
great
John.
stuff. Your enthusiasm triggers, I'm a normally positive guy, but it triggers the question, did you come across stuff where it said, meditation screws this up. Meditation has this downside. I know there's a couple of books out there like Why I'm Not a Buddhist that I think are kind of, I looked at it and I thought, no, this is not a very sharp book. But have you found things like that?
The best example of it, like PTSD, is one that you need to be have a quite a delicate hand with, right? Because often the instruction in, for example, in Vipassana is to be with whatever is arising and watch it falling away, like in a very general sort of sense. But for someone with PTSD, being with a traumatic experience might trigger the trauma to then reassert itself, right? So there have very much been studies around PTSD where people have been re-triggered and their trauma actually got worse from doing the practice. Now, I would argue that like that is not um, something that is sort of bad or a negative side of meditation. What that means is that there is a delicate hand, in the context of the teacher or the person who is the therapist who is working with this person to know how to work with that. Marisa gave a wonderful talk a couple months ago about working with trauma. And so there are ways, like depending on how the studies are built and depending on the teachers that are going through it, there can be negative things that can get pulled out of it, right? And so yeah, that's one example for sure that fits into that. But one thing I didn't mention that's kind of in line with this, but like I said in my intro, like I'm very much a physicist and a scientist, and one of the fun things that I've been learning in my, I guess, my spiritual journey is that I have found absolutely nothing in any of the research I've read, in any of the experiences that I've had, or anything inside of Buddhism that in any way goes against what I've learned in physics. Like it all seems to map like extremely well. There's a book, The Quantum and the Lotus, if you're interested in physics, where physics and Buddhism sort of come together. It's a fantastic book. Where there's a Tibet, I believe it's a Tibetan monk who quits Buddhism and comes to America and becomes an astrophysicist. And then there's an astrophysicist who quit physics and then went and became a monk. And they get together and have a conversation. And that's what this book is. And it's really fantastic. But anyway, yeah,
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
yeah,
And
yeah. Thank you, Jim.
it's not endemic. Even the PTSD, it's not like endemic it's like how you handle it, just like you said. So thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. And that book, like, Why I'm Not a Buddhist, they weren't even, it wasn't necessarily even like a critique on anything Buddhism in the sense of bad. It was more just like, oh, you're making these logical jumps that you're taking it too far. And I was like, well, I don't know. I hear you on that, I guess, John. It wasn't quite something that I looked at as like a negative. Yeah, yeah. Any other questions out there?
I have a quick question.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, how's it going? By the way, I'm one of Henry's old physics pals, so nice to meet everyone here. Um, so I'm curious, uh, about you spoke a little bit about neuroplasticity,
Hmm.
and there's certain like disorders and stuff like that that have to do with developmental disorders. Um, one of them that's very prevalent, I think, in the population are things like attention deficit. I'm curious if you came across any research that addressed that particular topic, and if there were any intriguing studies you came across, because obviously attention has a lot to do with what we talk about, right? Focused attention.
A hundred percent, Michael. There was a friend of mine who was asking me about ADHD research, and I myself put myself in sort of a minor version of ADHD. I have several family members as well, so I have a curiosity around it too. And there absolutely is quite a bit of research. I didn't include it in here because, as you see, my time was tight. Like I said, I could
Sure.
spend an hour on each category, I think. But if I come back and give rounds, I'll go into more detail around ADHD specifically. But there is Absolutely. Quite a bit of research. There's one paper I found in particular that I thought was really great that I can forward to you, Mike. Yeah, so there's that part of the brain that specifically is in charge of
Making the
keeping your
sound.
attention on the thing that you want to have your attention on, And so what they found was exactly what you would expect, is that by doing these practices, you're strengthening that part of the brain, right? You're strengthening the part that allows you to focus on something, and further, you're disconnecting the part of the brain that gets excited by stimuli. It's kind of like both sides. It's like, oh, there's a sound. Oh, what was that? Like, I need to go figure out what that sound was, or something like that. You're shaving that down as well. So the results are kind of twofold. I wish I could spout some statistics to you, but I wouldn't want to get it wrong. But I remember being very impressed with, like, specifically ADHD. It does absolutely have a lot of benefit, and I should have at least mentioned that in the talk. So thank you for the question, Mike. It is one that is not only prevalent, but seems to be becoming more and more prevalent in our society. And there are real benefits to be had by the practice, and all the practices, but especially the focused attention practice, the samatha, is especially key for that.
I get asked about that a lot, Henry, so it'd be great
Yeah.
to have, I just said I don't know what the answer is, so it'd be great to actually have some data that
Yeah.
will be a responsible answer to people who are asking about that, who would like to use the focused attention for that reason.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you, Tina.
Thanks.
I got time for one more, if there's one more question. At my work, they said you got to wait 30 seconds for a question, otherwise people might not speak up, because sometimes people need more time. So gotta love the awkward silence. Robin, so great to
Yeah,
see you, Robin. Thanks for coming.
thank you. I eat this stuff up. That's actually what got me into meditation, was the neuroscience. So thank you for all that. I'm not familiar with Christian Nash, the self-compassion research.
Kristen Neff, yeah, Neff. Yeah.
Oh, that's what I wanted, Neff.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just look at some of that stuff. And the first name is Christian, like CH.
Kristen, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, she has workbooks and all sorts of things, and courses, and yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's all. Simple question.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robin. Tina?
Yeah, so maybe we'll stop there. Thank you so much, Henry. That was just delightful, and I feel like it was an appetizer where I'd love to have the whole meal with all 4 courses. So we'll see if we can have that happen at some point. Yeah. So one thing we've been doing with these groups was to see if anybody is interested in having a breakout group with 2, like in triads with other people who are here, to have a chance to have some Sangha time, and then to talk about the topic. So I think the question we were going to pose was what stood out as inspirational or motivational, and what Henry was saying about the different practices. Was there anything to you that kind of stood out, that inspires you or motivates your practice after hearing about these things? So are there people who would like to do the breakout? It's 10 minutes. So what would happen is, if you want to be in groups, Jeannie would set up the breakouts to be with triads, and that would go on for 10 minutes, and you would talk about it, and then you would come back into the main room, and we would end by 11:45. So let's just see a show of hands to see if there's enough people. So, okay, great. So there's enough people for one group. So what we'll do then is thank the rest of you for being here. It was great having you as part of the Sangha gathering, and to see you. and we will look forward to seeing you at some other event in the future. So you all can drop off, and then Jeannie, you can put the folks who want to be in the group into a small group.